Okay, so imagine a chess game where you take a piece and it could flip to your side.
Oh,
Right. It's pretty wild. That's what we're talking about today on the deep dive. We're diving into chess reavers.
right.
Chess reavers is this really interesting take on chess. It was started back in 2005 by a guy named Philippe LANGUILLAT.
Yeah.
And we're going to be looking specifically at how chess reavers changes the fundamental strategy of chess itself.
Right.
And we're going to be doing that by looking at the sources that you sent over.
That was good.
Yeah. So we're going to be looking to really pinpoint what are the key innovations in chess reavers,
Mm-hmm.
and then also where does it fit in the history of chess and strategy games as a whole.
Okay, cool.
So let's start right at the beginning in 2005 with a game called Revers.
All right.
So Revers is actually short for reversible,
Wow.
and it's basically chess, but if you capture a piece and it's unprotected, you have to flip it to your color.
Okay.
And so one of the key innovations is the pieces themselves. So they're called reversible pieces, and they're bicolored. They're also symmetrically inverted.
I see.
And so this obligation to flip the piece really changes your perspective on material advantage in chess.
Absolutely. Because suddenly a capture isn't a loss for your opponent.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so from there, we move on to 2006.
Okay.
And 2006 is all about reintroducing captured pieces into the game.
Oh, wow.
So there are two variants that come out of that, Wave and Infinity.
Okay.
So with Wave, you can reintroduce captured pieces, but only on empty squares.
Okay.
And you can't put the opponent in check or checkmate when you reintroduce a piece.
Interesting.
With Infinity, the flip is actually optional, but you can still reintroduce the piece on any empty square.
I see.
And then there's this really funny story where a chess player suggested to LANGUILLAT, what if you could just put the opponent directly in checkmate?
Oh, wow.
And so from that, we got two more variants, Speed Wave and Infinity Speed.
So that's where the speed comes in, because it's like a faster checkmate potentially.
Yeah.
With that direct threat.
Yeah. And so how do you think that immediacy, the fact that a piece can suddenly appear
Right.
and put you in checkmate, how does that change the tactical landscape of chess?
Well, I think it really compresses the game.
Yeah.
The threat of re-entry forces you to be aware of the entire board.
Yeah.
Almost like a fluid space where pieces can just appear and disappear and reappear in a new spot
Right.
with a decisive impact. So I think you have to be much more aware of immediate vulnerabilities and opportunities
Right.
for those swift tactical strikes.
Yeah.
It's not so much about long-term position.
Yeah.
It's much more immediate awareness. Risk assessment is huge there.
Absolutely. Okay, so then we get to 2007.
Okay.
In 2007 is when LANGUILLAT introduces the idea of symmetrical and asymmetrical games.
Okay.
And so with that, we get two universes, the element universe and the equity universe.
Okay.
So element is basically like our familiar chess symmetrical play.
Gotcha.
But equity is where things get really interesting.
Okay.
Because in equity, players might have different numbers of pieces or different setups. They might even be playing by slightly different rules.
Interesting.
The idea was to balance these differences with player experience.
Okay.
So, maybe one player has more pieces, but the other player has a stronger starting position.
I see.
So it's not necessarily a level playing field, but the goal was to make it a balanced playing field.
Okay, so what do you think is like the core shift in thinking there when we go from symmetrical to asymmetrical play?
Well, I think the idea of equality is being challenged because in chess, we're used to both players having the same pieces and the same setup.
Right.
But in equity, that's not the case.
Right.
And so instead of trying to create identical conditions for both players,
Okay.
LANGUILLAT is exploring how these imbalances actually make the game more strategically interesting.
That makes sense.
So as a player, you have to adapt to these unique constraints.
Yeah.
You have to leverage whatever advantages you have, even if it seems like you have fewer advantages than your opponent. It's about making the most of your position within a fundamentally unequal framework.
Right.
Okay, so then we jump ahead to 2010.
Yeah.
And this is where we get the ultimate colorblind universe.
Ultimate colorblind.
And it's exactly what it sounds like. All the pieces are white except for the Black King.
Wow.
And so this universe has a nickname. It's called Mindbreaker.
That's a good name.
Yeah, for a reason.
Yeah.
Especially in Infinity Speed, where you have all these different options.
Right.
You can move, you can capture, you can optionally flip a piece, you can reintroduce a piece onto an empty square, and you can even put the opponent in checkmate with a reintroduction.
So it's like everything's on the table.
Yeah, it's a huge memory test.
Yeah.
And apparently no grandmaster has ever made a memory error playing Ultimate Colorblind.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
What does that tell us about like the potential of chess reverse, do you think?
Well, I think it shows that games can push our cognitive abilities in ways that we haven't even thought of.
Right.
Like, it's not just about calculation anymore.
Yeah.
It's also about memory. It's about pattern recognition. It's about being able to think strategically in unconventional context.
Absolutely.
It's a whole new definition of chess skill.
Okay, so how did things evolve from there?
Well, by 2024, we see the element and equity games being integrated into the ultimate colorblind universe.
Okay.
And then also in the equity universe in 2023, white is almost entirely externalized.
What do you mean by externalize?
So all of white's pieces except the king are off the board.
Okay.
And white's playing infinity speed against black playing regular chess.
Wow.
And an amateur player delivered checkmate in just 4 moves.
4 moves. Wow.
And then in 2024, in the element universe, we saw infinity external versus infinity external.
What's infinity external?
So only the kings are on the board to start.
Oh, wow.
And then the rest of the pieces are reintroduced throughout the game.
I see.
But you can't put the opponent in checkmate directly with a reintroduction.
Okay.
But there was a 7-move checkmate in that game.
So the game is like constantly being reinvented.
Yeah, it feels that way.
Yeah.
What do you think is driving this like constant innovation with chess rivers?
Well, I think it's this desire to really like push the limits of strategic thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Like each new variant is like an experiment to see how far you can push the boundaries of chess.
Yeah.
What cognitive skills are the most important. And I think it's about breaking down the traditional parts of chess and putting them back together in new ways.
Absolutely. Okay, and now we're at the most recent development, which is the Nexus universe.
Nexus.
So the Nexus universe was developed in late 2024 and early 2025.
Okay.
And it was inspired by the idea of grandmasters playing simultaneous games.
Okay.
So in the Nexus universe, you're actually switching between different chess rivers variants every 6 moves.
Every 6 moves. Wow.
Yeah. So there are 4 main variants in the Nexus universe.
Okay.
Nexus Q, Nexus Illusion, which is basically ultimate colorblind.
Okay.
And then Nexus Ether, which is actually a mental game with no board or pieces. And none of these Nexus games have even been tested in play yet.
Really?
Yeah, it's all theoretical at this point.
Wow.
But AI has confirmed that Chess Rivers as a whole is a metagame.
A metagame, okay.
And so LANGUILLAT has proposed this idea of multi-meta jeu, which basically means multiple metagames.
It sounds very complex.
It is incredibly complex. So what are your thoughts on the Nexus universe?
Well, I think it represents this shift towards like metacognitive skills.
Okay.
So it's not just about being good at one complex game.
Yeah.
It's about being able to adapt to entirely different rule sets very quickly.
Right.
And I think Nexus Ether is particularly interesting because it's like you're playing the essence of the game,
Yeah.
but without any physical representation.
Right. You're just playing it in your mind.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's take a step back and look at the history of chess.
Right.
You know, we've had chaturanga, we've had shatranj, we have modern chess, and all these different variations have introduced key innovations, you know, like increasing the mobility of pieces or standardizing the rules. And I think Chess Reverse definitely fits into that lineage.
Yeah.
But it also feels like it's making a much bigger leap.
In what way?
Well, with the reversible pieces, the reintroduction mechanics, the asymmetrical rules,
Right.
it's adding this whole new layer of strategic depth and complexity to the game.
Absolutely. And it's interesting how it's borrowing from other game traditions too.
Yeah.
Like the drop from shogi,
Right.
the flipping from Othello,
Yeah.
the asymmetry from modern board games.
Yeah.
It's like a synthesis of different ideas.
It's a real melting pot of game mechanics.
Yeah, and the jump in complexity is massive.
Absolutely. Like infinity speed has something like 10 to the power of 236 possible positions.
Wow. Compared to classical chess, which has, what, 10 to the power of 123?
Yeah, a huge difference.
It's mind-boggling.
Yeah. And it's interesting because it seems like Chess Reverse is catering to this modern desire for games that really challenge our brains. Yeah.
Like, we want games that make us think harder, that make us multitask, that test our memory.
Absolutely.
So to wrap things up, we've seen reversible pieces, reintroduction mechanics, symmetrical and asymmetrical universes, and the mental challenge of ultimate colorblind and Nexus.
Right.
It's clear that Chess Reverse is like a truly innovative and complex evolution of chess.
Right.
What do you think is the most important thing for listeners to take away from this deep dive?
Well, I think for me, it's this radical redefinition of what a piece is
Okay.
and what a capture means. Because in traditional chess, when you capture a piece, it's gone.
Right.
But in Chess Reverse, it's not gone. It can't come back.
Yeah.
It can be reintroduced, and I think that fundamentally changes how we think about material advantage in chess.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
It makes you think about strategy in a whole new way.
absolutely.
Yeah. So it really makes you wonder, is this the future of mind sports?
Mm-hmm.
Are we moving towards games that are more about adaptability and mental agility?
Right.
Or will the simplicity of classical chess always be king?
It's a good question. It's definitely something to think about.
Yeah.
So thanks for listening to the deep dive, and we'll see you next time.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.